Welcome back to the Evolving Warfighter. My name is Dr. Franklin Annis, and on this episode, I want to talk about a remembrance march that I just conducted to reflect back on the last 20 years since 9/11. I can say after a little over 10 hours of marching, I was able to travel 29.2 miles. Unfortunately, these basic issue boots just aren't up to the challenge of extreme marches, so it left me with more than blisters but bloodied feet. So I had to call on a little help to get where I am right now. Hopefully next time I'll be able to convert back to premium boots and travel further down the trails on my future marches. However, today I was out marching trying to raise funds for a wonderful charity called the Fisher House. The Fisher House builds housing units next to hospitals where seriously injured service members are recovering, injuries such as amputations or severe burns. This is a wonderful charity because it provides free housing for the families that come be with their service members, and more importantly, it really provides a sense of community for the service member and the family to really recover through a significant injury. So I encourage you, if you have the means, to make a donation so this great charity can continue its wonderful work. You can do so by typing in this link at the bottom of the screen, or you can copy and paste from the link below in the description of this video. Now I can say, looking back and reflecting over the last 20 years of experience, it's really hard to explain to someone what 9/11 was. And this was especially true for those that weren't alive during the 9/11 period. In a way, it would be kind of like asking someone what Pearl Harbor meant. We can maybe understand the historical significance, but the actual feelings, the emotion, kind of the cultural zeitgeist is all kind of lost to us. My sons recently asked me the question of what 9/11 was like, and I found myself having lots and lots of difficulty trying to explain just the significance of that event itself. And I'm quite sure there's a number of great 9/11 stories for those that lived through that era. We almost always have our own personal story. I was a student at Creighton University at the time, so I remember walking into a chemistry class that was going to last, I can't remember if it was 3 or 4 hours. About 15 minutes before the class started, we got reports of the first plane hitting the World Trade Center, and at that point, a lot of conversations went on about how a bomber once flew into the Empire State Building. And we were watching the news on the TV about what was going on. My professor walked in and shut off the TV. And we sat through a very long chemistry class. And when we walked out of that class, it was probably the closest thing I will ever experience to kind of a zombie apocalypse. When we were released from class, we noticed no one else was around, no one was in the halls, all the classrooms were empty. We walked out onto the mall at Creighton University. The mall was totally abandoned. And it was only until I walked into one of the dorms and saw students crying around the TV did I get informed that a second plane hit the World Trade Center and the follow-on events. I was a paramedic student at the time, so I reported to the Council Bluffs Fire Department. I was scheduled for ride along for the next 3 days, and I don't remember sleeping in those 3 days. We watched the news. We talked about what would happen if kind of a terrorist attack happened to Omaha or Council Bluffs, how we'd respond. Lots of conversations about how emergency equipment that was requested was never funded, and how it was really too late to try to prepare for terrorist attacks while you're in the middle of it. And every time those tones would go off for a moment, we'd be absolutely terrified about what type of call we were going to go out on. And obviously now, and luckily I can say, we didn't have a terrorist event in Omaha, but it was quite an eye-opening experience. I was an ROTC cadet at the time, and unfortunately I had injured my back a year prior in 2000, and it actually led to my disenrollment from the ROTC program before the war in Iraq and Afghanistan started. However, some of my classmates went to war. Captain Cahill now rests in Arlington Cemetery, not too far from here, having died in Iraq. And it's very difficult looking back on this experience and asking at the macro level, was the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan worth it? And that's going to be a very difficult question for me to answer one day, especially if my grandchildren ask. I'm truly stuck kind of with my father's generation asking that question about the Vietnam conflict. Was it worth it? And at the macro level, I'll save that to historians and politicians and everyone else, but I can say at a micro level, at least what I did in my personal experiences coming back into the Army and eventually deploying in 2009, at the local level, what we did was worth it. And it might not make sense in the global scale when it comes to politics, but it made sense with us in a situation trying to do our very best, and a lot of times we failed. But we intended to do right by the soldiers that we went with, and kind of bring everybody back home. And as problems plague the veteran community, whether that's depression, physical injuries, psychological injuries, divorce, suicide, homelessness, a lot of how veterans end up resulting from their wartime experiences, whether or not they can find value in what they did. And I think sometimes just looking at that macro level is very difficult, and that may not be answerable. But at the micro level, you know, did you do right by the man or woman standing next to you in uniform? Were you a good battle buddy? And I think all of us can find memories where we tried our best, or we had other people sacrifice for us, and we can find meaning in the actions that we did. And that might be difficult at times with some of the most traumatic experiences that we faced, but I truly think that we can find the positive out of that event. So as I reflect back, and it almost brings tears to my eyes thinking about Captain Cahill and asking, you know, was his death worth it in terms of the global politics? That's a very miserable question to face with. But I have no doubt that, you know, he did right by his soldiers, and I have no doubt that he was an exceptional leader, and that he was very sorely missed. And it's tragic that he left a wife and children behind. But I know that he was doing what he loved and doing the best that he could do in the situation. And that's probably one of the hardest things about 9/11 that I really wanted to convey to my sons. Them having, you know, being teenagers and not lived through the experience. I don't know how many of you recall the experience of kind of right after 9/11 where we were kind of all Americans, and you know, we were calling up friends that we had lost touch with, families got in contact with each other. Total strangers were greeting each other on the street, shaking hands, giving wonderful greetings. There was a huge outpouring of charity for those that were affected by the terrorist attacks. And I know it's utopian for me to think that we could ever get back there without some type of critical event. But, you know, maybe it's the dream of America to go back one day and have that sense of community and that solidarity. And as more negative philosophies come into our culture that seek to divide us by whether it's race, religion, sexuality, how critical theory is forcing us to separate each other, the negative impacts of COVID-19 that's just physically separating each other so we can't reform that sense of community. Looking back at it, that experience, I can say, as tragic as 9/11 was, I think it's even more tragic that my sons have never experienced kind of the unity that was possible or is possible, that America at our finest can pull together and kind of find unity as a nation. And I hope one day we can find our way back there without tragic events always having to make us remember the spirit of America. So with that, take the time to go out and talk to the veterans in your community, the ones that kind of bore the brunt of these last 20 years. Talk to them and just listen. I'm sure they'd appreciate just someone to listen. Whether they believe the war was good or believe the war was bad, it will help them if you just take the time to listen. I know the times are tough with COVID and financial situations are tight, but if you have the capabilities, the support, your local veteran community, whether it's through nonprofits or directly, I do encourage you to do that and kind of help those that have been most significantly impacted by the experiences of 9/11 these last 20-some years. And if you're looking for, a good charity to donate to, once again, please consider the Fisher House. So before I go, I do want to thank a couple of my sponsors that enable me to go out and do long-range marches such as this. The first one is Arise. They have a wonderful technology to protect your ankles. It's an exoskeleton device. It's something that I won't hike without, and something that, if you depend on your ability to travel across rough terrain, I encourage you to take a look at the technology. You can find their products at arise.com. If you use the discount code FisherHouse, spelled out all capitals, all one word, you can save 10% on a purchase today, or actually whenever you use that code you can save 10%, and then 15% of your purchase price will be passed along to the Fisher House charity. Additionally, I would like to thank Frog Fuel. It's a wonderful sports supplement. A couple Navy SEALs with the biochemist looking for the sports nutrition that they couldn't find on the market. So they developed a complete collagen protein that's fully digestible within 15 minutes. I highly encourage you checking out Frog Fuel Ultra. It's what I use for a pre-workout and what I use occasionally to keep me going down the road on my ultra marathon length marches. You can, if you use the link below, 10% of your purchase price will be donated to the Fisher House from now to the end of September. If you're a first-time purchaser, if you use the code WARFIGHTER20, you'll save 20% on your first purchase. With that, I thank you for your time, and I appreciate you taking the time to listen to this. Until next time, focus on your self-development so we can dominate the modern battlefield. I'll see you out on the trails.